The air in the restaurant was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and desperation. It clung to the polished wood, the white tablecloths, the forced smiles. He sat across from me, his face a mask I'd seen before, tight with controlled impatience. The woman next to him, his assistant, the one whose name I'd learned to choke on, traced patterns on her water glass, a small, smug smile playing on her lips. My hands were steady on the table, a small victory in a war I hadn't known I was fighting until it was already half over. My lawyer sat beside me, a stoic presence, a shield of quiet professionalism against the storm brewing across the table. They were talking numbers, assets, splitting a life into cold, hard figures. But I wasn't listening to the numbers. I was listening to the silence between his words, the way her ankle hooked around his under the table, the story told by the slight tremor in his hand holding the water glass. This wasn't just a divorce negotiation. This was the dismantling of everything I had built, witnessed by the woman who had helped tear it down. And in that moment, watching them, seeing their casual cruelty, something shifted inside me. A quiet click, like a lock falling into place. I stopped seeing the victim in the mirror. I started seeing the architect. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. Life, before the before, was a warm hum. It wasn't a fairy tale, no, but it was ours. Two people building something from the ground up. We met young, ambitious, broke. He had the vision, the drive. I had the detail, the persistence, the quiet ability to make things happen. He wanted to conquer the world of finance, to build an empire of wealth management. I wanted to build a home, a family, a life where we felt safe and loved. We built the business together, late nights fueled by bad coffee and fierce belief. I wasn't officially a partner, not on paper, but I was the backbone. I managed the finances, the operations, the messy human side of clients who weren't just numbers, but people with fears and dreams tied to their money. I entertained the key clients, remembered their kids' names, sent anniversary cards. I created the stable ground he stood on while he went out and closed the big deals, charmed the room. Our world expanded slowly, deliberately. A small apartment gave way to a house, then a bigger house in the right neighborhood. The worn-out car became a solid, dependable one. Vacations moved from camping trips to actual hotels. We weren't flashy, but we were comfortable, building wealth not just in the business, but in the shared history, the inside jokes, the unspoken understanding that came from years of being in the trenches together. We were a unit. Or, so I believed. My dreams were simple: stability, family, watching our lives unfold together, growing old in comfortable rhythm. His dreams were bigger, louder, constantly chasing the next peak. I supported him, always. His success was my success. His happiness was my happiness. My own ambitions had quietly folded themselves into the shape of his life, a comfortable, familiar sacrifice. I didn't see it as a sacrifice then. I saw it as partnership, as love. I was the foundation, strong and silent, holding up the soaring structure of his career. I took pride in that. Immense pride. I thought he did too. The first crack was so small, I barely noticed. A late night that wasn't about a client crisis. A sudden sharpness in his tone when I asked a routine question about the business. A new phone that was always face down. Clichés, I know. They feel mundane until they're your life. Then they are seismic shifts, tearing the ground beneath your feet. He hired her a year before. Young, bright, fresh out of some prestigious program. Ambitious, yes, but that was good, he said. She'll be a valuable asset. He talked about her constantly at first, her ideas, her energy. I smiled and nodded, happy he had good support. Then, he stopped talking about her. That, I realize now, was the real sign. Not the talking, but the silence. The conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The hushed tones on the phone. The way his eyes flickered when her name came up. The air shifted, growing thin and brittle around us. Sleep became a battlefield of unspoken fears. My body knew before my mind did. The constant knot in my stomach, the way my hands would tremble when I was alone. I started looking for proof, hating myself for it. Checking phone bills, credit card statements. Searching for the undeniable, even as I prayed I wouldn't find it. The discovery was not a single explosive moment like in the movies. It was a slow, agonizing dawning. A casual comment from a mutual friend who had seen them at a restaurant far from the office, looking cozy. A receipt for jewelry that wasn't for me. A hushed voicemail accidentally left on the home phone. Piece by piece, the picture formed, a grotesque, distorted version of my life. When I finally confronted him, the air didn't explode. It went utterly still. Cold. His confession wasn't filled with remorse, but with a weary, almost petulant resignation. Like he was tired of hiding, tired of the effort, and my discovery was merely an inconvenience, speeding up the inevitable. He didn't apologize for the betrayal. He apologized for me being hurt, as if my pain was the problem, not his actions. He wanted to leave. He wanted to be with her. He packed a bag that night, his movements clinical, efficient. The house felt enormous, silent, suddenly filled with the echo of a life that was no longer real. He drove away, taking not just his clothes, but the future I thought we had built. The silence he left behind was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It screamed abandonment. It screamed betrayal. It screamed the end. The first few weeks were a blur of shock and survival. Every mundane task felt monumental. Getting out of bed, making coffee, walking the dog. Each step was weighted with grief, humiliation, and a blinding rage that had nowhere to go. Friends tried to help, offering meals, shoulders to cry on, endless cups of tea. Their kindness was a lifeline, but also a painful reminder of the life that was now gone. The whispers started, of course. In a small community, news travels fast, especially news that involves money and scandal. The pity in some eyes was almost worse than the judgment in others. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like my skin had been flayed off, leaving me raw and defenseless. I had to tell my family. That was one of the hardest parts. Seeing the hurt in their eyes, the anger towards him. My mother held me for a long time, just stroking my hair, not saying anything. My father, a man of few words, simply squeezed my hand and said, "We're here." It was everything. Then came the practicalities. The lawyers. Divorce papers. Financial disclosures. Splitting assets that represented decades of work, of shared sacrifice. His attitude was immediately infuriating. He acted like I was getting a handout, not a fair division of what we had built together. He and his lawyer lowballed me at every turn, treating the marital assets like his business profits, not the result of our combined effort and my direct, indispensable contribution behind the scenes. He became cold, calculating. The man I had loved seemed to vanish, replaced by a stranger motivated only by greed and a desire to minimize my share. He wanted me gone, clean break, minimal cost. He wanted to start his new life unburdened by the past, especially the financial cost of the past. The assistant, her name was Clara, surfaced in unexpected places. Casually mentioned by his lawyer. Included in emails about logistical matters related to the house. I saw photos of them together, looking sickeningly happy, splashed across social media feeds I couldn't help but check. They were living the life I had helped build, in the world I had helped create. It felt like a violation, a constant rubbing of salt in the wound. Every interaction with his lawyer, every piece of mail from the court, was a fresh wave of pain and indignity. I felt like I was drowning in paperwork and despair. My early attempts to navigate this new reality were clumsy, desperate. I tried therapy, yoga, meditation. They dulled the edges of the pain, but didn't fix anything. I tried to focus on finding a job, something I had needed to do for years, so integrated was I into his world. My skills, honed in the quiet engine room of his business, didn't translate easily to standard job descriptions. I felt adrift, unqualified for the outside world, haunted by the one I'd lost. He made it harder, subtly. Delays in providing financial documents. Unnecessary legal maneuvers that increased costs. Little power plays designed, I knew, to wear me down, to make me desperate enough to accept a pittance. Clara was often mentioned in these exchanges, framed as his new, indispensable partner, the future of his business. It felt like a deliberate taunt. Look who I have now. She's better, younger, more valuable than you ever were. The world seemed to shrink, closing in on me. The house felt too big, too empty. The silence that had been deafening after he left settled into a heavy, constant pressure. I felt small, defeated, watching my life being dissected and divided by people who saw me only as a historical liability. The future looked bleak, a long, lonely road I was ill-equipped to travel. Doubt gnawed at me. Had I been foolish to invest everything in him? Had I lost myself completely in his shadow? Was this my destiny now, to be the discarded wife, struggling to piece together the fragments of a shattered life? The fear was paralyzing. The unfairness of it all burned like acid. He got to walk away, seamlessly transitioning into a new life with a new partner, while I was left sifting through the wreckage, expected to be grateful for whatever crumbs fell from his table. The thought was unbearable. Utterly, completely unbearable. Somewhere in the suffocating darkness, a flicker appeared. Not hope, not yet. Something colder. Harder. I was sitting with my lawyer, poring over financial statements for the 100th time. Details about his business, his clients, the revenue streams I knew intimately. My lawyer pointed out discrepancies, aggressive accounting. Standard practice, she said, in tough negotiations. But as I looked at the names, the numbers, the client retention rates, something clicked. I knew these clients. Not just their accounts, but them. I knew about Mr. Henderson's fishing trips and Mrs. Davison's prize-winning roses. I knew which clients valued loyalty, which valued personal connection, which were simply pragmatic about results. I also knew his business's inner workings, its strengths, its weaknesses, the key dependencies. And I knew Clara. I had observed her, perhaps more keenly than she knew. I had seen her ambition, her sharp intellect, yes, but also her ruthlessness, her singular focus on her own advancement. She wasn't loyal to him. She was loyal to power, to opportunity. My anger began to cool, replaced by a chilling clarity. He wasn't invincible. His business, built on the foundation I had laid, and now increasingly reliant on Clara's front-end work, had vulnerabilities, dependencies. And I, the discarded wife, knew exactly where they were. I started shifting my focus. Less on the emotional wreckage, more on the architecture of his success. I began to think not about how to survive the divorce, but how to understand the system that had enabled his betrayal and how that system might be disrupted. My lawyer was initially confused by my new line of questioning. I wasn't just asking about assets anymore. I was asking about client contracts, non-compete clauses for him, not me. He'd made sure of that, the organizational structure. I was studying his business like a general studying enemy fortifications. I realized my years in the quiet engine room had given me a unique perspective. I knew how the machine worked and, perhaps more importantly, where the critical points of failure were. I started thinking about Clara not as the woman who stole my husband, but as a variable in a complex equation. An ambitious variable. What did she want? Was she content to be the perpetual assistant, even the partner's girlfriend? Or did she have her own aspirations? The seed of an idea, cold and strategic, began to sprout in the barren landscape of my grief. This wasn't just about getting a fair settlement anymore. This was about understanding the levers of power, the true value creators, and recognizing that the man who had cast me aside was perhaps more vulnerable than he appeared. The midpoint shift wasn't a sudden event. It was a gradual internal hardening. A transformation from victim to strategist. From reacting to his moves to quietly planning my own. I started doing my own research, late into the night, learning about the industry beyond his specific niche, identifying emerging opportunities, understanding the value of client relationships built on trust, not just transactions. I wasn't just a woman scorned. I was a woman analyzing a market, identifying potential entry points, and calculating risks. The thought of revenge was a powerful fuel, yes, but it was tempered by a growing, quiet confidence in my own capabilities. I had been the invisible force behind his success for years. What could I do if I chose to be visible? If I built something for myself? The divorce proceedings dragged on, a constant drain of energy and resources. He remained stubbornly resistant to a fair settlement, emboldened, I suspected, by his belief that he held all the cards. His business was thriving, his new life with Clara seemed stable, built on the ruins of mine. Photos continued to surface, them at industry events, them on vacation, them looking like the perfect, successful couple. It felt like a deliberate display, a victory lap at my expense. My lawyer advised patience, pragmatism. The legal system moved slowly. But the endless delays, the constant reminders of his new happiness juxtaposed with my struggle, began to wear me down. There were days I felt the old despair creeping back in, the fear that I would never escape this, that he had truly won. Money was getting tight. The uncertainty of the future felt like a physical weight. It seemed, for a time, that no matter how much I analyzed or planned, he was simply too powerful, too entrenched. The system favored him. His connections, his reputation, undamaged by the affair in his professional circles, his control over the business assets, it all added up to an insurmountable advantage. I saw him occasionally, in court hallways, across crowded rooms at unavoidable social functions. He would offer a tight, polite nod, a distant look in his eyes, like I was a ghost from a life he'd already forgotten. Clara was always nearby, a possessive hand on his arm, a triumphant glint in her eye. They were a united front, solid, powerful. And I was outside their circle, looking in, feeling the sting of my irrelevance. This was the deepening crisis. Not a single dramatic event, but the grinding, relentless pressure of a situation that seemed rigged against me. The moments of clarity and strategic thinking from the midpoint shift were tested by the harsh reality of my isolated position and his apparent invincibility. Doubt whispered in my ear. Was I delusional? Was my quiet planning just a coping mechanism, a fantasy? Should I just accept whatever he offered, cut my losses, and try to build a meager life from the scraps? The thought was tempting in its exhaustion, but the image of their smug faces, the knowledge of what I had contributed, the sheer injustice of it all, kept a spark of defiance alive. It was a tiny spark in a vast darkness, but it refused to be extinguished. The crisis deepened, pushing me closer to the edge, forcing me to confront the real possibility of total defeat. And in that confrontation, my resolve, forged in the fires of betrayal and humiliation, hardened into something unbreakable. The breaking point arrived not with a bang, but with a calculated silence. I had spent months watching, listening, gathering information. I'd reconnected with some of the key clients, ostensibly just catching up, expressing concern about the changes at his firm. I hadn't badmouthed him directly, not yet. But I had listened, and I had heard the subtle anxieties. Clients who felt less prioritized now. Clients who missed the personal touch I had provided. Clients who were wary of Clara's aggressive style. I also learned more about Clara herself. Her non-compete clause with his firm was surprisingly weak, a detail he'd clearly overlooked in his haste to bring her in and, later, to flaunt their relationship. I learned about her own quiet networking, her connections with other firms, her thinly veiled ambition for something more than being an assistant. I saw the cracks in his control, the subtle tensions between him and Clara. He was possessive, demanding. She was resentful of being kept in his shadow, tired of his arrogance. The relationship built on excitement and shared disdain for me was starting to fray under the pressures of daily business and conflicting ambitions. The turning point was when I decided to act, not just observe. It wasn't a decision based on emotion, but on cold calculation. I leveraged a contact, someone who knew the industry deeply, someone who owed me a quiet favor from years ago. I shared my concerns about the stability of his firm under the current leadership, the potential for disruption, the value of relationships built on loyalty. I didn't explicitly tell them Clara was planning to leave or that I was orchestrating anything. I simply planted seeds of doubt, highlighting the risk factors, subtly suggesting that smart money looks for stability and trusted relationships. I also, through a carefully orchestrated chance encounter, had a brief, seemingly innocuous conversation with Clara. I didn't threaten her. I didn't expose her. I simply alluded, very vaguely, to the challenges of working with someone who takes all the credit, who controls all the relationships, who sees you only as a tool. I spoke hypothetically, of course, about the importance of building your own brand, your own client base, your own future, independent of anyone else. I saw the flicker in her eyes. She knew I wasn't speaking hypothetically. She knew I saw her, truly saw her, in a way he never would. I hadn't told her to leave. I hadn't told her to steal clients. I had simply shown a light on the door she already wanted to open, and perhaps, subtly, indicated that the world outside wasn't as scary as she might think, especially if she wasn't starting from scratch. I also quietly reactivated my own network, reaching out to a few key contacts I had maintained over the years, letting them know I was exploring new opportunities, leveraging my experience in wealth management operations and client relations. I positioned myself not as a competitor to him, but as a potential solution for clients seeking a different approach, a more personal touch. I wasn't stealing. I was simply preparing a landing strip for the inevitable turbulence I knew was coming. The turning point was my shift from passive victim to active participant, manipulating the environment and leveraging the existing weaknesses in his carefully constructed world. I wasn't just waiting for karma. I was setting the stage. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. My lawyer rang, her voice calm, but with an undertone of surprise. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Clara quit. Walked out this morning. And it looks like she's taking a significant number of his biggest clients with her." A cold wave washed over me, not of shock, but of recognition. The wheels I had set in motion were grinding, precisely as I had anticipated. This wasn't just karma. This was a planned demolition, catalyzed by my understanding of the players and the system. Apparently, the confrontation had been spectacular. He had discovered her plans, or perhaps she had simply decided the time was right to strike. He had screamed, accused her of betrayal, disloyalty, theft. The irony was so thick, I could almost taste it. He screaming about betrayal? He accusing someone of disloyalty after what he had done? Clara, I learned through the grapevine that was already buzzing, hadn't backed down. She had calmly informed him that the clients were leaving with her, not because she stole them, but because they had lost confidence in him. His arrogance, his affair, the instability he had brought, it had all created the perfect storm for her to step in as the stable alternative. She had leveraged his own weaknesses against him, just as I had leveraged my understanding of their dynamic against both of them. He was blindsided. Completely and utterly blindsided. He had seen her as a reflection of himself, a tool, a possession. He never imagined she had her own agency, her own plan, fueled by her own ambitions and perhaps a quiet resentment for being the other woman, while he still battled his divorce. He had been so focused on punishing me, on minimizing my value, that he had completely missed the threat growing in his own office. The phone lines at his firm were melting down. Clients were calling, confused, angry, demanding explanations. His remaining staff was in chaos. His carefully constructed world, the one built on the foundation of my silent work and now reliant on Clara's visible success, was imploding. My lawyer, usually so reserved, allowed herself a small, dry observation. "He didn't see it coming at all," she said. "He's in a panic. It changes everything. The financial leverage he thought he had, the power he wielded by controlling the business assets, was dissolving in real time. The clients who were leaving were the ones I had identified, the ones I had subtly reconnected with, the ones I knew valued stability and trust. Clara was taking them, yes, but she was taking them into a void I was preparing to fill. This wasn't just revenge, it was reclamation. It was watching the architect of my pain suffer the precise kind of loss he had inflicted on me, the loss of a future he believed was guaranteed, the loss of control, the profound shock of betrayal from someone he trusted. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat publicly. I sat in silence, the phone still warm in my hand, and felt a cold, quiet satisfaction spread through me. The war wasn't over, but the biggest battle, the one that would decide the ultimate victor, had just been won. Not with a bang, but with the deafening silence of his collapsing world. The aftermath was a strange mix of frantic activity and profound stillness. His business, crippled by the sudden exodus of key clients and the loss of a vital player, entered a tailspin. The arrogant certainty he had projected during the divorce negotiations evaporated. His lawyer, now on the defensive, was suddenly eager to settle. The terms shifted dramatically in my favor. With the business valuation plummeting, he could no longer afford to fight. The assets we divided, while still representing a significant amount, felt different now. They weren't just pieces of a broken life. They were resources for building a new one. Clara, I heard, landed on her feet, taking her new client book to a rival firm where she was given a lucrative partnership track. She had used him as a stepping stone, a means to an end, and when the opportunity arose, she took her piece and moved on. She hadn't been loyal to him, but she had been fiercely loyal to her own ambition. And, in a twisted way, I respected that. She was a mirror of the ruthless world he inhabited, a world he thought he controlled. But while she went off to her new corporate tower, I was building something different. Remember those key clients who were looking for stability, for a personal touch? Some of them, wary of the upheaval at his firm and unsure about Clara's new corporate home, started reaching out to me. They remembered my role, my dedication, the trust we had built over the years. They weren't coming because Clara sent them. They were coming because I was the known quantity, the steady hand, the reminder of a time when their financial lives felt safe and personal. I didn't chase them aggressively. I simply answered when they called. I listened to their frustrations, their uncertainties, and I offered an alternative. Not a big, impersonal firm, but a small, bespoke wealth management consultancy, focusing on personalized service, transparency, and long-term relationships. My own business was born not from a grand plan made in a boardroom, but from the ashes of my marriage and the strategic dismantling of his world. It started small, just me and a part-time assistant. But the clients I acquired were loyal, valuable, and their fees quickly allowed me to not just survive, but to thrive. My winning bigger wasn't about destroying him utterly, although seeing his arrogance crumble was undeniably satisfying. It was about building something for myself, something independent and strong, something that surpassed the life I had lost. It was about reclaiming my worth, recognizing my own capabilities, and using the knowledge and experience I had gained in his shadow to step into my own light. The bitterness lingered, of course. Betrayal leaves a scar that doesn't entirely fade. But the dominant feeling was one of quiet triumph, of vindication, and of a profound sense of liberation. I was no longer the wife, the assistant's rival, the victim. I was the architect of my own future, standing on ground I had built myself. The silence that had followed his departure, the silence that had screamed loss, was now filled with the quiet hum of my own creation. The world didn't feel small and closing in anymore. It felt vast, full of possibility. I had taken the shards of my broken life and forged them into something stronger, something beautiful, something entirely mine. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.